Hi, Mystery Recapped here. Today, I'm going to explain a Spanish dystopian series called The Barrier. Spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. Episode 1. The show opens in Spain, where a little girl named Julia is looking out the window as a huge commotion unfolds outside. On the TV, the president is addressing the nation about World War III and how natural resources have been rationed and placed under strict control. New viruses have caused hospitals to collapse, leading to the declaration of a state of emergency. Soon, Julia and her twin sister Sarah are summoned by their father, Ramon. He tells his daughters that he loves them and injects something into the back of their necks. He then gives them necklaces before they pack their belongings to leave. Not long after, the girl's mother, Amelia, rushes into the house and embraces her daughters. Unfortunately, several military officers storm in and violently drag Ramon away as Amelia is left screaming and sobbing. The scene then cuts to 25 years later when we see an adult Julia in a dystopian Madrid controlled by the military. Julia now works as a delivery person and soon arrives at a brothel to drop off a package of alcohol. While trying to leave, she hears someone crying from a room, so she heads there and finds a young girl named Sol crying. Julia feels bad for her and tries to take her away, but a man suddenly comes in and tries to stop them. He almost kills Julia by strangling her, so in her defense, she takes out a knife from her pocket and brutally stabs him. Moments later, the man succumbs to his injuries, while the two women frantically proceed to escape, but Julia suddenly remembers that she left her necklace inside, so she asks Sol to stay put and goes back. She retrieves her necklace and returns for Sol, only to realize that the girl has left. A horrified Julia quickly returns home without anyone noticing and cleans up the blood. Not long after, her boyfriend Carlos finds her in a tense state and asks what happened. Julia tearfully confesses that she killed a man. However, he wasn't just an ordinary man, but a high-ranking military officer named Major Merida. The scene then cuts to a small town where we meet a man named Hugo and his daughter, Marta. It turns out that Marta is the daughter of Sarah, who recently passed away due to a deadly virus. Hugo and Marta place a flower on her grave before meeting Hugo's brother, Alex. The three then head to Madrid, where they plan to meet Marta's aunt, Julia, and grandmother, Amelia. Upon arriving at the checkpoint, the soldiers ask about her mother, so Marta lies and tells them she will be joining them soon. Meanwhile, at the brothel, a police officer named Major Jimenez arrives to investigate the murder with his team. He questions all the workers and discovers that the dead officer had been with a young girl whom they believe to be the murderer. The officer then takes the workers to the station and brutally beats and tortures them to extract information about that girl. At the same time, Carlos warns Julia that she must leave the city, as the police will eventually find her. Julia worries about her mother, but Carlos reminds her that staying would put her mother in danger. The couple thus decides to leave the city tomorrow, so Julia goes to see her mother for the last time. In the next scene, Hugo, Marta, and Alex finally arrive at Amelia's place, and the family is overjoyed to be reunited after a long time. Julia also shows up not long after, and Marta comments that she looks exactly like her mother. Afterwards, the family decides that no one must know about Sarah's death from the virus, because it would mean the government would arrest and possibly kill them for being infected. The next day, Hugo, Alex, and Marta attend a routine blood test, which is required for all newcomers to the city. During this, the nurses find something unexpected in Marta's blood and quickly alert their superiors. Things then take a bizarre turn when some officials forcefully take Marta away, which panics her father and uncle. The poor girl begins to cry for help, while Hugo and Alex desperately chase after her to bring her back. Unfortunately, their efforts are in vain, as Marta is taken away in a vehicle, while Hugo is beaten up by the military. Not long after, Hugo arrives at Amelia's place, where he frantically explains what happened. At this moment, the block chief, Begonia, introduces herself and suggests that the government may have taken Marta because Hugo is unemployed. The woman seems loyal to the authorities and assures him that Marta will be sent to a colony where she will be well cared for, but Hugo refuses to believe this and is desperate to get his daughter back, so Amelia says she knows someone who can help them. Later, Amelia arrives at a secret location where she gets into a fancy car and meets the health minister, Luis. They seem to be old friends, so Amelia explains the situation and asks for his help to get Marta back. Luis says his wife is looking for some employees and suggests he can give Hugo a job, which could help bring his daughter back. Amelia agrees, after which Luis provides his home address and also gives a pass for Hugo to get through. true. It turns out that in this reality, the rich live in an area called Sector 1, while the poor live in Sector 2, which is divided by a fence. A pass is required for the poor people to cross the heavily guarded military fence. Emilia thanks him for his help, while Luis looks at her with affection, hinting that he has a soft spot for her. The next morning, Hugo arrives at the checkpoint, where he uses his pass and finally enters Sector 1, which looks beautiful and posh. Soon, he arrives at the minister's mansion, where he meets the head housekeeper, who urges him to repeatedly wash his hands. Hugo then meets the minister's wife, Alma, who interviews him and offers him the job of housekeeper despite his engineering background. A desperate Hugo agrees, but Alma asks him to bring his wife as well, as it is a married couple's position. Hugo explains that his wife is in another town, but when Alma says it is non-negotiable, he reluctantly promises to bring her tomorrow. In the evening, we see Marta and several other kids taken to a mysterious facility called CIM. The children are forced to hand over all their possessions, but Marta secretly keeps a necklace, which was a gift from her late mother. Not long after, the director of the facility arrives, and she turns out to be none other than Alma. She speaks with a scientist named Dr. Thomas, and we learn they are conducting experiments on the children to find a cure for the virus. Thomas claims that these experiments are extremely dangerous, and the kids could die, but Alma doesn't care, saying the children are their last hope. Episode 2. In another scene, some police officers arrive at a rundown neighborhood where they finally locate Sol, who has been hiding with her grandmother and little sister. The grandmother tries to protect Sol, insisting that the dead man was a predator who used to forcibly take young girls away, but the officers refuse to listen and immediately execute the old woman before arresting Sol. They then take her to the police station, where she is subjected to ruthless torture as they demand to know who killed Major Merida. Elsewhere, Carlos and Julia are about to leave the city when, all of a sudden, they are approached by Hugo. He explains how Marta was taken away, and that the only way to bring her back is for him to have a job, but for that, the employers are asking for his wife. Since Julia and Sarah look exactly alike, Hugo begs her to pretend to be his wife until he secures the employment contract. Julia is stunned by this and refuses, as she intends to leave the city immediately. She apologizes to him and proceeds to leave with Carlos on his bike, but along the way, Julia becomes worried about her niece and eventually decides to help Hugo. Carlos reluctantly agrees to the idea, and the two plan to meet at 11 p.m. that night to escape the city. Following this, Julia returns home and tells her mother about her plan to take Sarah's place. Emilia then cuts off her daughter's signature braids so she can look exactly like her sister. Meanwhile, at the police station, Major Jimenez mercilessly tortures Sol until the girl finally reveals the truth about the man's murder. She then describes Julia's face to the officers, who immediately begin distributing wanted posters throughout the city. Not long after, Begonia also receives the wanted poster and immediately recognizes it as Julia. She goes to meet Emilia and asks about her daughter, but all of a sudden, Julia shows up and introduces herself as Sarah. She says she hasn't seen her sister lately, so Begonia reluctantly walks away from there. Afterwards, Julia arrives at the fence, where she meets Hugo, and both of them head into Sector 1. They soon arrive at Luis's house, where the head housekeeper makes them shower before assigning them their responsibilities. That night, it turns out to be a huge dinner party, where we meet Alma's children, Ivan and Daniela, along with a few other guests. It turns out Jimenez is also among the guests, which makes Julia extremely nervous. The officer then comments that her face looks very familiar, but Luis says she is a friend's daughter and harmless. After the party is over, Hugo and Julia finally receive their employment contracts, which fill them with relief. Julia then confesses to Hugo about killing the government official who was molesting a minor girl. Hugo is shocked to hear this and thanks her for risking her life to bring Marta back. Elsewhere, Alma returns to the CIM, where she speaks with Dr. Thomas about the progress of their experiments. We notice the kids becoming very sick and vomiting continuously because of the experiments. Alma then goes to see the children, during which she approaches Marta and calls her special. She soon finds a necklace with the little girl, which angers Alma, as the kids are not allowed to have personal items. She thus orders a nurse to throw the necklace away and threatens to fire her if it happens again. Elsewhere, Julia arrives at the location where she and Carlos are supposed to meet, but he doesn't show up. She begins to panic, while elsewhere, we see the officers have tracked down Carlos and are shooting him. Not long after, Jimenez announces to the public that the murderer of Major Merida has been caught and shot dead while trying to flee. Meanwhile, Julia is with a few homeless people who are also trying to leave the city when, all of a sudden, a drone appears before them. A stunned Julia Julia urges everyone to take cover just as the police arrive and start shooting everyone. Episode 3. Amid the chaos, Julia and a father and son scramble to hide behind a wall, but their efforts are in vain. They are eventually caught, and when the son tries to run, he is instantly shot dead. His distraught father attempts to reach his fallen boy, only to be killed as well. Witnessing this, Julia is horrified, and just as she is about to be shot, Hugo appears and tells the officers that she is his wife and that they both work for the health minister. He claims they are new to the city and that she must have lost her way, insisting she wasn't trying to flee. Upon hearing this, the officers reluctantly let them go, but warn them to be careful next time. Once they're alone, Hugo finally tells Julia that Carlos is now dead and that he is being labeled a murderer in the news. Julia's world comes crashing down upon hearing this, and she begins to cry while Hugo comforts her. The next morning, Julia and Hugo go to work in Sector 1 as usual, since they still haven't gotten Marta back. Luis then asks Hugo to help fix his car, since the man is an engineer. Meanwhile, Julia is assigned to care for Alma's nephew, Sergio, who has recently formed a good bond with her. The scene then cuts to the police station, where we see that Carlos is still alive, but being brutally tortured by the officers. Jimenez demands to know the whereabouts of his girlfriend, but Carlos refuses to reveal anything despite the unbearable pain. In the afternoon, Alex arrives at the place where Marta was first taken and shows all the paperwork to prove that his brother is now employed. He wants to get Marta back, but the official tells him to go home and wait for a letter from the government. This frustrates Alex, and just then, he comes across Daniela, who is also a lawyer. She feels bad for him and tries to help, but unfortunately her efforts are also in vain. Once he is alone, Alex is approached by a nurse who invites him for a private conversation on a rooftop. They smoke together, during which the nurse tells him not to worry, as the little girl is in good care. She then gives him her address and invites him to visit later so she can offer help in the situation. Back in the CIM, it is revealed that a young boy has died after being subjected to extreme experiments, but Alma shows no concern, and she becomes happy to learn that the scientists are getting closer to a cure. She then goes to visit the children, where the nurses hand each of them yogurt, while Alma tells them a story. Alma praises the kids, telling them how special and courageous they are, and that they will one day save millions of lives. As the story concludes, the children lose consciousness from the spiked yogurt, after which the nurses begin drawing their blood. Elsewhere, Julia is hanging out at a park with Sergio when he suddenly presents her with a necklace. Julia's eyes widen in shock as the necklace belonged to Marta, and she asks where he found it. The boy says it was in a trash bin nearby in front of the CIM building, which Sergio reveals is his aunt's facility. A horrified Julia begins digging through the trash and soon finds Marta's blood-stained clothes as well. She wastes no time and immediately heads home, where she shows the clothes and necklace to Hugo. Both of them suspect that Alma may be behind the whole thing and decide to check out the facility. In another scene, Alex arrives at the nurse's flat, where he finds her dressed provocatively. She begins to dance and seduce him, and they end up becoming intimate. However, once it's over, the nurse suddenly pulls out a gun and points it at Alex. It is revealed that she is a government informant, but before she can kill him, there is a knock at the door. It turns out to be Amelia, who had found the nurse's address on a paper that Alex had left. She tries to take Alex, and when the nurse resists, Amelia pulls out her own gun and shoots her dead. This horrifies Alex, but Amelia instructs him to ransack the apartment to make it look like a robbery. She then finds the nurse's diary containing some critical information and hides it in her clothes. Elsewhere, Hugo manages to fix Luis's car, so he takes Julia and drives away from the house. The two soon arrive at the CIM building, where they sneak inside without being noticed. While snooping around, they enter a morgue-like room and are horrified to see a covered dead body on a table. The duo braces themselves for the worst and pulls off the sheet to see whose body it is. Episode 4. To their relief, it is not Marta, but the boy who died a few days earlier due to the dangerous experiments. The duo is still shaken, and as they check several compartments, they uncover the bodies of many dead children. They decide to find Marta and sneak through the facility while carefully avoiding the security. They finally manage to reach the hall where all the children are sleeping, and through the glass door, Hugo softly calls out to his daughter. Marta hears him and rushes to the door, where she is overwhelmed at the sight of her father. However, they barely have a moment to reunite as the security guards are alerted and they begin approaching. Hugo is forced to leave, but he promises Marta that he will come back for her soon. Hugo and Julia then narrowly escape the building before the security forces can catch up to them. Elsewhere, Amelia and Alex return home, where she tells him that the nurse's diary contains a list of people who are in danger. She asks him to go to an address and hand over the diary, but tells him not to mention her name. Alex agrees and heads to the address, where he meets a young woman named Iris and her father, who turn out to be from a resistance group. Alex tries to warn them and hand them the diary, but they suspect he is a spy and knock him unconscious. In the meantime, Julia and Hugo return to the minister's house, where they angrily demand to speak to the minister. The security tries to stop them, but they manage to reach Luis anyway and explain how they saw several children being held inside the CIM, which is run by Alma. Alma pretends to know nothing about it and acts shocked, while Luis decides to go to the facility and see it for himself. However, as soon as they leave, Alma makes a call and immediately orders the building to be evacuated. Sometime later, Hugo and Luis arrive at the CIM, where Hugo explains everything he saw, but when they reach the hall where the kids were kept, they find the beds empty and no children in sight. Dr. Thomas also appears and tries to explain that there is nothing suspicious going on and that no children are being abducted. A panicked Hugo immediately runs outside, where he finds a truck preparing to take the children away. Unfortunately, he cannot find Marta there, as she has been loaded into another truck, where the children are being gassed into unconsciousness. In another scene, Alex wakes up tied to a chair, while Iris and Fernando demand to know how he got the diary. Poor Alex explains everything that happened over the past few days, including how the nurse had lured him and tried to kill him, but the father and daughter refuse to believe him and are about to shoot him right when Daniela shows up. It turns out that, although she is the minister's daughter, she is also part of the rebel group and helps the poor people. She vouches for Alex and convinces the others that he is not a spy, after which he is finally allowed to go. The scene then returns to Alma's house, where she is visited by Jimenez, who promises to help her with the situation. It is revealed that Alma and Jimenez are secretly having an affair, and he is fully aware of and supports her criminal activities. Not long after, Luis returns home with Hugo, and Alma insists she does not know where the children came from. Luis appears to believe her and instructs Jimenez to investigate, stressing that their top priority is to find Marta. Later at the police station, Jimenez interrogates Dr. Thomas, who quickly surrenders and reveals that Alma has been in charge of the project for the past 5 years. He even provides all the proof confirming that the abductions and the experiments on the children were ordered by Alma. Elsewhere, Luis gives Julia and Hugo a ride home in his car, where he encounters Amelia outside. She invites him in for a meal, and he also gladly accepts. Later, as the two catch up, Luis recalls the past, and it is revealed that he was once in love with her. However, she married someone else, which ended up breaking his heart. These memories make Luis very upset, so he abruptly says he has some work and leaves the house. Meanwhile, Julia is approached by an officer who insists she come to the police station for a chat. She tries to refuse, but the man says it is non-negotiable, so Hugo offers to go with her as her husband. Later, at the police station, the officer asks about her sister Julia, who murdered someone, but Julia pretends not to know anything. She also insists that her sister could not have committed the murder. However, the officer knows she is really Julia and shows her some items that belonged to Carlos, along with his ashes. This deeply shakes Julia, as it brings back memories of their past, but she tries to put on a brave face and hides her emotions. Elsewhere, Alex is tasked with driving Luis home, during which he also receives a pass to enter Sector 1. There, he notices Daniela and is shocked to realize that she is the minister's daughter. Daniela is annoyed to see him and warns him not to reveal anything about her involvement with the rebel group, to which Alex agrees. In another scene, we see Alma and her son Ivan arriving at a remote location where they check on the children in a truck. They then grab an unconscious Marta from the group of kids and take her away. Episode 5. The next morning, Alma is seen driving Marta in her car, where she tells the girl to keep the entire situation a secret, warning that it would only worry her parents if they knew the truth. Meanwhile, Julia and Hugo are still locked in a cell at the police station. Julia is clearly terrified and thinks they're going to kill her, but fortunately, the officers finally release the two of them. Later, Julia arrives on the roof of a building, where she scatters Carlos's supposed ashes and pays her respects. Not long after, Amelia arrives at the station and tearfully embraces her daughter. It turns out she has learned about the murder and urges Julia to escape the city, to which the latter agrees. Elsewhere, we see Carlos, who is still alive and being mercilessly tortured by Jimenez. The corrupt officer tells Carlos that he will spare his mother and Julia if he agrees to work for him. Since Carlos is now presumed dead to the world, he can operate like a ghost and work for him discreetly. Meanwhile, at home, Amelia once again asks Alex to go to the Resistance building and seek their help in getting Julia out of the country. Alex agrees and heads there, where he meets the same father-daughter duo. Alex asks for their help in getting Julia to safety, but Iris says they have no available space and tells him to leave. At this moment, Alex forcibly enters the apartment, where he notices Daniela is also there, along with a sick woman holding a baby against her chest. But when Alex checks on the woman, he realizes she is dead, which sparks panic among everyone present. Elsewhere, Alma finally brings Marta home, where the family is relieved and overjoyed to see their daughter. Hugo thanks Alma for everything, while Amelia invites her inside for a glass of water. Alma then begins asking her about her relationship with her husband, but Amelia clarifies that they are just good friends. Later, Julia and Hugo take Marta aside privately and ask where she has been all these days and what she has done. However, the little girl notices Alma in the distance and refuses to disclose anything out of fear. Back with the resistance group, the baby begins crying desperately, and they struggle to keep him calm. To make matters worse, several nearby soldiers hear the baby and come to investigate. With no other option, Alex and Daniela quickly sneak out the back with the baby. Meanwhile, the officers approach the flat and question Iris about any unauthorized people inside. Iris points to her father and the dead woman sleeping in bed, claiming they are her sick parents, and no one else is present. The soldiers also seem to believe her and finally leave her alone. Later, Alma and Luis arrive at the CIM, where they see the police presenting Dr. Thomas's dead body hanging by the neck. It is clear that Jimenez murdered him and staged it to look like he did it to himself. The officer claims that Dr. Thomas was the one who abducted the children for experiments, which is why he took his own life after being exposed. But Luis does not believe this and asks Jimenez to investigate the matter further, to which the officer agrees. On the other hand, Daniela brings the baby home, where she meets Hugo and Julia and asks them to take care of it. The couple agrees, but soon Luis arrives at the house and is shocked to see the baby. He is disappointed that Daniela brought a child from Sector 2, which is against the law. He immediately contacts an orphanage to take the baby away, and even though Daniela tries to protest, her dad refuses to listen to her. Meanwhile, at home, Marta sits with Amelia and Alex and tells them what happened at the facility, while showing needle marks on her hand. She begs them not to tell her father and reveals how she and a friend sneaked out at night from the facility. There, they saw a room with a projector, where the doctor and director referred to Marta as a unique subject. Marta asks what a unique subject is, but Amelia simply tells her that she is special. At this moment, there is a knock on the door, and it turns out to be Iris, who has come to get the baby. She claims that some people are leaving the country tonight, and that the baby also needs to be in the truck where his father is waiting. However, Amelia refuses to help unless they provide a spot for Julia as well, who needs to escape the city. Iris hesitates at first, but when she realizes there is no other choice, she reluctantly agrees. Elsewhere, Alma and Jimenez are making love in a hotel room, and afterwards, he hands her the evidence of her crimes given by Dr. Thomas. He tells her to do as she wishes with it, as the official report will be something else, which pleases Alma. Meanwhile, Alex uses his pass to enter Sector 1 and soon arrives at the minister's house. He meets with Hugo, Julia, and Daniela and tells them they need to smuggle the baby out at any cost. He explains that there is a transport arranged for that night, and they even have a spot for Julia, which is a good thing. So, Hugo, Julia, and Alex successfully take the baby out without anyone noticing and manage to escape the mansion. However, upon reaching the checkpoint, Hugo and Julia show their passes, but Alex doesn't have a return pass with him, so the trio is arrested. To convince the soldiers, Hugo explains that they work for the health minister, so the soldiers immediately call Luis to confirm this. Not long after, Luis arrives at the checkpoint, and even though he is disappointed by their actions, he vouches for them. He then takes them away from there, and surprisingly decides to help them by giving them a ride. Sometime later, Hugo and Julia arrive at the pickup point, where the two hug and say their goodbyes. Before leaving, Hugo hands Julia a letter from Amelia for her daughter. Julia then gets inside the truck with the baby and reads the letter, which makes her very emotional. Not long after, things take a turn for the worse when, all of a sudden, a police car stops the truck for an inspection. Unfortunately, it turns out to be a trap, as the ruthless soldiers begin mercilessly shooting at the truck to assassinate the poor people. After a while, they open the door and find everyone dead inside the truck, except for the baby. However, we soon learn that Julia had already left the truck, as reading her mother's letter overwhelmed her with emotion. She decided that even if she were to die, it would be better to do so alongside her family. Following this, Julia returns home with Hugo and hugs her mother tearfully, while saying that that she couldn't leave her alone. Hugo then goes to check on Marta, but is surprised to see her door locked. He immediately breaks the door open, only to find an armed person who quickly jumps out of the window. This leaves the whole family shaken. While outside, it is revealed that the mysterious person is none other than Carlos. Episode 6. The next morning, Julia's family watches the news, which reports that the group of people who were shot last night are being labeled as terrorists by the government. This revelation devastates the family, and they grow worried about the fate of the poor baby who was in the truck. Hugo, on the other hand, is shaken by the previous night's incident and decides to take Marta with him to work. Later, Julia is cleaning Marta's room and is shocked to find a key hidden under the bed, left behind by Carlos. It turns out to be the key to Carlos's mother's apartment, so Julia wastes no time and goes to visit her. The woman is blind and appears to be in poor condition after her son's supposed death, which deeply worries Julia. Later, Hugo and Julia head to work with Marta while reminding the little girl to refer to her aunt as her mother. When they arrive at the mansion, they learn that Alma has been promoted to director of epidemiology, and a grand celebratory party is being planned for that evening. Alma is delighted to see Marta and takes her away to play with Sergio, while her parents are assigned the task of buying groceries. While preparing to head to the store, Julia confesses to Hugo that she visited Carlos's mother after finding a key in Marta's room. Hugo fears it might be a trap set by the authorities and urges her not to go back, but she refuses and insists that the old woman is alone and needs her help. Back at the house, Alex and Amelia are confronted by Iris and her father, who are now furious over the previous night's shootout. They believe Alex leaked information about the truck, leading to the military ambush that killed everyone inside. Their suspicion also falls on Amelia due to her close friendship with the health minister, who is supposed to be their enemy. Alex insists that it was actually the minister who gave them the ride and knew about the escape plan, but Amelia refuses to believe that Luis could have orchestrated something so sinister. Elsewhere, Hugo and Julia visit Carlos's mother, along with food and groceries. The old woman explains that she often hears people entering her apartment and stealing things, but being blind, she is powerless to stop them. While Julia steps out to buy medicine, Hugo stays back in the kitchen to cook soup for the old woman. Suddenly, a homeless man barges in and attacks Hugo while demanding all the food. Hugo tries to calm him down, but shockingly, Carlos appears from behind and overpowers the man. He threatens to kill him if he ever comes back, after which the homeless man panics and flees. Meanwhile, Hugo is stunned to see that Carlos is still alive. Carlos asks him not to tell his mother or Julia, since he doesn't want to put them in danger. Hugo agrees and realizes that it was Carlos who had sneaked into his house the previous night to leave the keys. Carlos then briefly watches his mother from a distance before quietly sneaking out of the building. The scene then cuts to the party that night, where Alma is very excited about her new position and is joined by a group of friends. She gives a speech and announces that they have come extremely close to finding a cure for the virus, prompting everyone to cheer for her. Afterwards, Luis is privately approached by his best friend Alvaro, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Alvaro looks deeply worried and warns that a powerful group within the government is planning to eliminate them. Luis dismisses it as a conspiracy theory and asks him to calm down, but Alvaro remains unconvinced. He subtly hints that Alma may be involved in this planning, but Luis gets offended and firmly insists that his wife would never do such a thing. Before leaving, Alvaro gives Luis an address and urges him to go there if anything ever happens to him. Luis reassures him that nothing will go wrong, after which Alvaro says goodbye and drives away. After the party is over, Hugo and Julia decide to head home, but as they approach Marta, they notice that she has fallen asleep beside Sergio. They gently try to wake her right when Alma enters the room. She calmly insists that Marta is tired and asks them to let her spend the night. Hugo is reluctant and worries for his daughter's safety, but when Alma continues to insist, he realizes he has no choice. He leaves his daughter in Alma's care and leaves with a heavy heart. Sometime later, Hugo takes Julia to an isolated place, which shocks her because this is the place where she had her first kiss with Carlos. Julia wonders why he brought her here, when suddenly, Carlos emerges from the shadows, leaving her completely stunned. Julia can't hold back her tears of joy to see him alive, and the couple embraces each other with relief. Meanwhile, at Alma's home, she calls in a group of nurses who draw blood from Marta, and even Sergio, showing that the evil woman won't even spare her own nephew. Episode 7. Around midnight, Luis becomes distraught after receiving the shocking news of Alvaro's car accident, in which he tragically passed away. He begins to suspect that something is seriously wrong, and starts to consider that Alvaro was was right about the conspiracy. The next morning, Julia wakes up after spending the night with Carlos, only to realize he is gone. She recalls him saying last night that this would be their final meeting and that he had to leave for her safety. Later, she and Hugo head to the minister's mansion for work, where they learn the devastating news about Alvaro's death. Luis then recalls the address that his late friend had given him and decides to go there with Hugo. Meanwhile, Julia brings breakfast to Sergio and Marta and suggests they go play in the park later. However, the children look unusually pale and they prefer to stay home and watch TV, which strikes Julia as strange. At the same time, Alma shows no concern over Alvaro's death and carefully gets ready for her important meeting with the president. Daniela finds it shallow that Alma can dress up and focus on work so diligently instead of supporting her husband in such a difficult time. However, Alma tells her daughter that she doesn't understand how the world works and claims that everything she's doing is for the sake of her children. Sometime later, Luis and Hugo arrive at the address given by Alvaro, where they are shocked to see a heavily pregnant woman. She turns out to be Alvaro's mistress, and Hugo is stunned that his friend kept this a secret from him. The woman, whose name is Clara, looks terrified because of Alvaro's death and is convinced he was murdered. Just then, Luis receives a call from work and has to leave, so he asks Hugo to take care of Clara in his absence. Back at the mansion, Julia approaches the children's room but notices a drop of blood on the floor. The scene then cuts to Hugo, who discovers Clara bleeding on the floor, which sends him into a panic. Meanwhile, we learn that Carlos is watching them from a distance with a rifle and reporting everything. It turns out that he has been ordered by Jimenez to kill the pregnant woman, but her being accompanied by Hugo puts him in a difficult position. Meanwhile, Hugo tells Clara that she needs to go to a hospital, but she refuses, fearing that whoever killed Alvaro will come after her. With no other choice, he decides to take her to Emilia's house to seek help. Emilia checks on her and concludes that everything is okay for now. Clara is still panicked and worries that her baby could be seized by the authorities. She then reveals that the people who murdered Alvaro have been abducting children from the streets to extract their blood, warning that the world will soon be left without children. Elsewhere, Alma arrives to meet the president, where she presents her report, which explains her research on finding a cure for the virus. The president seems convinced by her explanation and signs off on her proposal, which pleases the evil woman. The scene then cuts to Luis, who is consoling Alvaro's widow in his mansion when he is suddenly approached by Hugo. Hugo explains Clara's sudden bleeding, so Luis rushes immediately to Emilia's house to check on her. At the same time, the cunning neighbor Bagona meets with an assassin and hands over the keys to an apartment. The man heads to the apartment, which has a clear view of Emilia's place, and prepares to shoot Clara. Shortly after, Luis arrives at Emilia's house and tries to calm Clara, assuring her that no one will harm her baby, but she tells him how Alvaro was murdered by his own people and urges Luis to bring justice for his friend. She also reminds him that he didn't listen to Alvaro's warning the other night. At the same time, Alex is rushing to close all the doors and windows when he suddenly spots a sniper in a nearby building. He quickly returns inside and tells everyone to take cover, just as the assassin opens fire on the house. Fortunately, no one is injured in the chaos, and the sniper eventually retreats after realizing he's been exposed. Luis then asks Emilia to contact the resistance so they can safely evacuate Clara out of the country, to which she agrees. Meanwhile, Julia discovers Marta and Sergio watching a video of strangely dressed children singing in unison in a remote location. Julia asks what it is, to which Sergio explains that it's one of his aunt's videos. The video immediately raises Julia's suspicions, and she realizes that something far more sinister is going on. The scene then returns to Emilia's house, where Iris and her team arrive to escort Clara to safety. They cover her face and swiftly move her out of the house, while Carlos is seen positioned nearby, ready to take the shot. However, just when he's about to fire, Julia arrives, which causes him to hesitate. Seizing the moment, the group successfully gets Clara into a vehicle and drives her away, while Carlos reports the situation back to the other snipers. Not long after, Hugo's group is abruptly stopped by a squad of soldiers demanding they hand over the hooded woman. The group reluctantly complies, but when the soldiers pull back the hood, they are stunned to see that it is actually Iris, not Clara. Elsewhere, Clara is seen safely inside a car with Luis, who is transporting her out of the country. Along the way, Luis apologizes to her that she has to leave due to corrupt authorities like him, but he assures her that he won't let anything happen to her or the baby, as he owes his life to his best friend Alvaro.